Good afternoon and welcome back, everybody, and welcome for the first time for some of you newcomers to the week that was our weekly news show from Deadline Detroit, covering the entire gamut, at least we try, of newsworthy items that have occurred over the last 7 days. I'm Saeed Khan, joining you today from merry old England. I'm in London, but you've got to love technology, which is facilitated by the COVID pandemic. We are not scared to use it, which allows me to be part of this Hollywood Squares matrix just as if I were in Metro Detroit. We have a wonderful lineup today, including welcome to the show, Tiffany Ellis. Tiffany's an attorney with Weitz and Luxembourg, not spelled in the usual way of Luxembourg. And she is a national leader in sex trafficking litigation and is also quite active in opioid cases as well. Welcome, Tiffany.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Okay. And to show you that we really are about gender parity, we are joined with our own Nancy Derringer.
Hi.
And we've got our editor-in-chief, the maestro himself, Alan Langle. Welcome all.
Hello.
Well, Metro Detroit, of course, has reached the news even here in merry old England, with, of course, what has been going on with Oxford and the shootings. And, of course, this past week, we had the capture, the arrest, and the arraignment, as well as the detention of the Crumbley parents, found in, I wouldn't call it, I guess, an art grotto, but an art studio of some sort in Detroit. And they were finally captured. And it seems as though the person eligible for the reward will, in fact, get the reward. So what are your thoughts about this segment of this rather tragic story?
I just think it's pathetic. I mean, the parents are just, I mean, first of all, they're so irresponsible. And then the fact that they're fleeing is just insanity. I mean, you know, I mean, acting like criminals that they are, they're suddenly on the run. They take out $4,000. I mean, their attorney, who is obviously lying, saying, "Oh, they were planning to turn themselves in." Well, you don't take $4,000 out of the bank and hide in a building in Detroit if you're planning to turn yourself in. And initially, they knew, the charges were announced, I think, around noon or something like that. But I don't know. It's just pathetic.
I think they made it pretty clear the night before that they were going to announce those charges the next day. That those parents had a plan. And to me, it shows exactly what they taught their child. They're bullies and they're cowards. And there's nothing that can explain what he did. But they showed exactly who they raised their child to be. They were prepared to leave him in prison, to rot, to do whatever, and run away to another country. How they thought they were going to get there from where they were in Detroit is beyond me. That neighborhood is one that I'm well familiar with. I drive through on nearly a daily basis, certainly in the summertime. And it's just unbelievable to me that they would even think that was a possibility. Just bullies and cowards.
Well, isn't there that cocaine bathysphere that smuggles drugs across the Detroit River? I think there was something like that.
I think that was the Purple Gang about a century ago.
I think we're assuming
but I think they updated it to Ferry Yayo back and forth, so that might be a possibility. Nancy,
I think we're assuming some facts, not in evidence here. I don't think that they had a plan to flee to Canada. For starters, they would have had to have passports. It's possible they have passports. A lot of people, or enhanced driver's licenses, I guess. It's possible a lot of people around here have them because they visit Canada often. They like to gamble in a smoke-free casino, that sort of thing. But I think they would have also had to have vaccination cards. And I think if there's, I put their probability of having valid passports at 50-50, but vaccination cards at more like 80-20. So I really do kind of tend to believe the story that the artist told, which is that they were just looking, they called him and they said they were getting death threats. And they wanted to get away. It does seem that they were fleeing. They certainly knew they were charged and they were being sought, and they should have turned themselves in. I don't know if they had a coherent plan to get out. But the one thing I want to say about this is something that Dave Barry pointed out in a long, funny essay many years ago about South Florida. And he said he called it the Florida effect, which is, he said, news stories don't just happen like the way they do in other cities in places like Florida or Detroit. They like metastasize and they get weirder. I mean, if you had asked me to point on a map where I thought the Crowleys were at 5:00 last Friday, I would have said 75 south headed for Florida, because, they were either going to turn themselves in at Mar-a-Lago or they were just trying to get the hell away. And that's the easiest place to go, is to blend in with a lot of other weird white people, would be, Florida or the American South somewhere.
With the stop.
Never would have thought they were in Detroit. But
with the stop in Arkansas at a Stuckey's.
Yeah.
It's Waffle
I
House.
never would have thought they were
the Waffle House,
Detroit.
right.
It just it blows my mind, but there you go.
Now, just one point of correction, Nancy. It is the Chumbleys, not the Crowleys. You don't need to
What do
impugn
they call them?
a long-gone department store.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't. Yeah, you're right. It is the Crumbleys. You know what? I was thinking, because you're in England, I was thinking about Downton Abbey.
That is a deft save. Yes. Let's see what you can do with the Jacobsons.
Okay.
Well, we are also joined by Greg Bowens, columnist with Deadline Detroit, civil rights activist, and public relations professional. Welcome, Greg.
I don't know what's going on, man.
Bombast is always Greg. Tiffany, I wanted to ask you, did you watch the arraignment on last Saturday morning, and what you thought we did of the defense attorneys?
I did not actually watch the arraignment, but the one thing I wanted to add about the Crumbleys being in Detroit, when the news came out, I've lived downtown for about 9 years now. And when the news came out, and my friends and I were discussing it, we almost had to laugh about them fleeing to Detroit if they thought they were going to find safety here, as if anyone in the city, in the wake of everything that happened last year with the Black Lives Matter movement, with all of the folks that are standing up for really what's right in the world, if they thought they were going to be able to hide in the city because this is where, deep, dark secrets hide, they were so deathly mistaken. If anybody had seen them out, I think they would just be reported to the police right away. And,
Right.
The artist aside, it was just an ironic thing that these folks that had just really done this terrible thing thought that they could find safety in our city.
They're like people that came down to Detroit to dump old tires,
Yeah.
Exactly. It seemed like a really outdated view of what Detroit is.
The Detroit police chief, James White, was saying that, oh yeah, we were prepared, we were expecting. It's like nobody expected them to be in Detroit. As Nancy said, I-75 South was a much better bet. If you were betting on, one of these websites, these gambling sites, you would have taken the odds 1,000 to 1 that they're going to end up in Detroit.
Well, maybe they read that plaque on the fist, Alan, that says, bring me your huddled masses, your criminals, your wretched wretch. I think that's probably where they were going. Greg, what do you think about the capture of the Crumbleys?
The capture.
I think it was pretty much a stroke of luck, given all the media coverage about the shooting and the parents, and they were on video with the arraignment. It was a tip that led, Detroit police to the Crumblies, not some super sleuthing, detective work.
It's always the way it works. If it weren't for snitches, if it weren't for informants and snitches, there'd be no law enforcement in this country.
Right. And so, I definitely appreciate, Chief White having a press conference at 3 a.m. to announce that they had captured the folks, and certainly for their speedy response. At the same time, this is really, like Nancy just said, how it works. Tips come in and they find them. The big story is how the sheriffs out there in Oakland County, Bouchard, bumbled this whole thing, given that he weighed in pretty quickly after the shooting had happened, while you had the local police chief and police department, who were the ones that had responded, who were the ones who were responsible for what was going on, and who were the ones that initially arrested the young man. And presumably, they would have been the ones who would have been called had the counselor or the administrators insisted that that the parents take the child out of school right after that conference, and they refused to do it. And so there's been a lot of posturing, I think, that has gone on in relationship to this tragedy. I mean, it does call for all hands to be on deck. But at the same time, what we're seeing is people fighting for attention. That's what's going on.
I have a question for Tiffany. The kid gets a court-appointed attorney. The parents dig in their pockets to get what we assume is a better attorney, but it's not always the case. What do you make of that? That they just say, the kid's screwed. We're not. We got a shot at.
Yeah, I mean, it goes to my earlier point about them running away from their child. And I think, was it during his arraignment where they were in a car actually on their iPhone? And so the irony of that, the fact that they were in a car was really foreshadowing. I think that these parents are selfish. I think that they, have demonstrated the values that they've taught their child, and allowing, anything like this to happen, both in, buying him a gun and then allowing him to stay in school that day. And it's a shame. It's an absolute shame that anybody would behave this way to their own child and allow that child to wreak havoc in our society. They hiring their own attorney is not unexpected in my mind.
Is it possible though that these attorneys approach them and because there is there's a certain the higher you can raise your profile as a criminal defense lawyer, the better. And is it possible that they said, look, we'll discuss the fee later, we'll represent you in your arraignment, and like that? Is that possible?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's certainly unethical and not allowed by the rules of professional conduct. It does happen. Okay. And I'm not, certainly an attorney could say, we're going to represent you pro bono. But soliciting clients is not really something that you're supposed to do. It's frowned upon. It's a bad look. And there's all sorts of lawyer jokes that have gone on for centuries, probably because of that. Well, but I think you're right, Nancy. That's a good point, that somebody probably did go to them and say, let me help you here.
Right.
Or it could have been a friend who said, hey, I know some people who can really represent you, and they're willing. I've talked to them already.
Or some people.
This particular law firm represented, Dr. Larry Nasser. Represented the doctor who was under indictment for performing female circumcision. Is that the same? Them too? Wow. Okay.
They did well on that case. Yeah. They did well on that case, not the Nasser case. I mean, Nasser's got more 100+ year sentences, but on the circumcision case, I think they actually.
By the way, and I don't think it's been substantiated whether at their son's arraignment if they were sitting in a white Bronco while that was happening. So just
a helicopter from KMBC following
with that going on. Well, as far as grandstanding goes, we of course now have the news that Attorney Jeffrey Feiger is representing two siblings who were at the high school. Suing the school district for, and I'll do it properly, $100 million. Was that inevitable, Greg?
Yes, it was. I don't know if it was inevitable that Jeffrey Feiger would have been the first one to jump out there and do it. Certainly, there are plenty of aggressive plaintiffs' attorneys out there that are looking for this opportunity to weigh in on this issue. And the sad thing is that when we have tragedies and accidents and that capture headlines, the only thing that can kind of sort of make things right is money. We don't have anything left. That and trying to institute some stronger sort of like things that would allow or prevent this kind of thing from happening. And that's the thing that really, troubles me about the sort of swirling that has gone on around this. I mean, we were all in shock. We were all hurt by what had occurred, and the sort of slow boating to accountability is the thing that strikes me. Yes, Oxford strong. Yes, Oxford healing, and that's great. But if there isn't something that is done right now, today, some simple steps that people can take to avoid what had happened before that led to this shooting, on the part of the schools, apparently on the part of the state child protective services agency that could have been involved, and certainly on the part of everybody in the community that's connected to these folks who saw the mother put this posting up saying, we got this kid this gun for his birthday. Now, I'm not friends with her on Facebook, but there are plenty of people out there who are on social media who are connected to her and who had saw this posting because she was a real estate agent, because she sent, she's pretty active on social media. And no one reached out to her. None of her friends or anybody said, hey, do you really think that's a good idea?
You know what I think is interesting is I help Adolph Mongo on Saturday mornings at 10 a.m., 10 to noon on Saturdays. And we had a caller call in on Saturday, a Black listener who said, why should we care about those people in Oxford? And I brought up and said, that's a problem because some people in Oxford, Oakland County, whatever, say the same thing about Detroit, about all the shootings. Why should we care about the Black people? And that's, it's really just sort of highlights how divided and how, Detroit is just so many cities within villages. And we have to think a little bit more expansive than that,
Well, I mean, if the person that had called in had looked at TV, they would have seen Black students on TV and Black parents on TV who were crying and distressed and had run and had dodged bullets and all that stuff. So, yeah, it's sort of easy to think that there are no Black people in Oxford, like there are no Black folks in Macomb County. But the truth of the matter is that Black and brown people, they're everywhere. White people are in Detroit. Right.
West Bloomfield. Yeah, exactly. And Adolph pointed that out. He goes, our children are going to schools all over in Oakland County. We're in West Bloomfield. We're here and there. And so people have to realize that and
that reaction right there is what makes it easy for even policymakers to not to live in some kind of fantasy land. When we say urban, we generally think Black. When we say suburban, we generally think white. And, even though we know that there are more Black people that live outside of Detroit than do live in Detroit at this moment, we still approach issues and policies as if there were neat boxes that you could put, communities into and leave it at that. And so, yeah, that Alan is very distressing. And I think that,
I think so.
Yeah. And I think that's part of the, who would have thought that, they would have been in Detroit? These white folks hiding out in Detroit. Like, that would be the last place, that you would find white people.
Something that you said a second ago, Greg, and to get back to your original question about the lawsuits and the civil lawsuits that are going forward. I'm a plaintiff's trial lawyer. I represent survivors and victims and people who have been, for lack of a better term, screwed over by greed or whatever else it is. And, what we try to do, and what I explain to my clients all the time is, we can never go back and take away somebody's experiences or delete them from memory or fix the harm that's been done. And unfortunately, money, as you said, Greg, is the only substitute for justice that we have at that point. And it's the reality of our world. But in this, so I'm not at all surprised that these lawsuits are going to be filed, and they will be. But it's an uphill battle for them because of governmental immunity for the schools, because of the school district officials, and really, I think what they were experiencing. My father's a longtime school board member in a small town in the Thumb where I grew up, and this is a conversation that we've been having over the last few days about what what the school could have done differently. There's a great article in Bredge magazine this week about really what the school officials were facing in the days leading up to that. And this child didn't have a disciplinary record. He had no real indication that following the rules that have been set out in this environment over the last 20 years have been designed to protect kids from exactly this situation from happening. That's the really sad part about it, is that we've got this system where kids go through drills so they know what to do. But when it came down to the officials evaluating what was going on with this one child, they didn't have everything in place that, the rules dictated they needed to take action. And it's really sad. And so I think when we talk about policy and going forward, the real difference that any lawsuits might be able to make is maybe a question of injunctive relief. It's a question of continuing the conversation about how school district officials are supposed to handle situations like this, where every other system has failed. Neighbors, friends that saw the Facebook post, child protective services that might have done it. What are the school district officials really supposed to do in these sorts of situations? It's tough. It's tough.
I just want to add one thing to that. That was a very good story in Bredge magazine, and it pointed out that the decision making that went into letting this kid go back to class is something that we applaud when the culprit is a first grader who has chewed his peanut butter sandwich into this shape of a gun and is going bang, bang, bang. Those. I mean, we've all heard those horror stories about kids who were kicked out because. I mean, I remember in Indiana it was a boy who came to school on like ethnic dress day, and he was wearing a kilt because he was Scottish. And apparently, part of the Scottish turnout when you're kilting is to have this dull knife in a scabbard on your fluffy thing in the front, whatever they call it. And, it was like, he couldn't have dissected a frog with this knife, but he was expelled from school for it because he brought a weapon to class. But that's the one thing I want to say. The other thing I want to say, going back to what Greg pointed out about why didn't anyone say anything about this Facebook post? Ooh, we took my little boy, shooting with this brand new Christmas present. Has it ever occurred to anybody that this is a prevailing common attitude in a place like Northern Oakland County? I mean, I've been up there, you've been up there. It's the country. It's a small town, but there's a lot of there's a lot of Second Amendment people up there who might have just not seen anything wrong with that. I mean, these are the people who always tell us that the solution to gun violence is for children to be trained in how to handle weapons. I mean, he was trained. He knew what he was doing. So that's all.
Yeah, I have real mixed feelings about that in some ways. I grew up, like I said, in a small town. When I was in 8th grade, we had 2 required classes in 8th grade: hunter safety and boater safety. Because,
there you go.
And I think that was good. I'm really glad that I have that foundation of my education.
Did that train you?
I know how to bake a cake.
There, Tiffany?
Does what?
How much do you want to bet that if we peel back? Oh yeah. How much do you want to bet that if we peel back the onion on this a little bit more in terms of the school's lack of action in relationship to this kind of thing, that we will find that, because people are saying, look, if that was a black kid, they would have kicked him out immediately. There wouldn't have been any discussion about, let's get the parents in and let's sort of talk about this. It would have been, I saw this kid had a gun. He was looking up ammo. They'd been like, he's out of here. He's out of here. Well, now that's a sort of like prevailing thought. Maybe Oxford isn't really like that. But if it's like most school districts where suburban school districts, small town school districts, where you have this issue of the hammer coming down hard on black and brown kids, meanwhile, white kids are getting the benefit of the doubt more often than not. And, to be honest with you, I was surprised when I saw, the black kid that was on there with his mother and the black kids that were talking and how traumatized and how they knew people and the father and the parents, and started crying on the couch when he heard that his friend had died. Who could not be moved by that? At the same time, we've got people calling in to Adolph Mongo's show with Alan Lingle going like, why should I care about that? That's just white folks out there. And so there's this weird schism that sort of goes on. But I'm willing to bet that if we look at this, they gave that young man the benefit of the doubt that they otherwise wouldn't have given other students of color.
Well, remember, Greg, I mean, the teachers were alarmed by him just simply looking up ammo on his phone. So they did the right thing by taking it forward, it seems. You're also looking at a community that in the last 40 years has changed so much from being what would have been just, Tiffany, I imagine, just like another city in the thumb or a town in the thumb, to being a true exurb, to being one that has South Asian kids, African American kids. One of the victims was at least part Asian. So I think it's a community that is now going through these kinds of growing pains. I mean, when I was in the thumb, I mean, I remember when people of Tiffany's demographic came in and they said, well, there goes the neighborhood. But, you know, being the South Asian enclave that Lapeer is. but even I recall that it took a bit of a learning curve of sensitivity to people dealing with otherness because they just weren't acclimated to it.
Well, we had
and I think there's a duality between urban and rural areas too. You know, to Greg's point, I don't know that it's necessarily even entirely about race, but it's like a feeling about comfort and threats and safety and what makes us feel that way. And so when you walk into Cass Tech, you're not at all surprised that you're walking through metal detectors. You know, why is that not surprising? You know, but if I were to walk into Oxford High School and, you know, not see metal detectors, like that's sort of a surprising thing. And I think that school districts maybe, and I consider Oxford probably more of a rural school district than even a suburban or a urban district, certainly. But they have handled student safety differently because of where they're located. And that probably has a racial component to it. But it's something that needs to be talked about more frequently, and how these sorts of rules and guidelines that we're developing that are supposed to fit across the board for all student safety really are implemented in different ways for whatever reason.
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead, Alan, please.
I was just saying my impression, and you guys are from that area, but I remember in '95 when I went up to Decker, Michigan for the Oklahoma bombing, where they were raiding the farmhouse up there. And at night we ended up over at the Decker bar, and it was reporters who had come from like international, publications. And so, and it was such suddenly an integrated bar. It was like this white enclave. And suddenly, I mean, our photographer was Filipino. And when he went to the bathroom, some redneck at the bar yelled, "Who let that," he said, "Who let that gook in?" And we were like, wow. Yeah, yeah. And then there were black people there and stuff. And they were just like, I think they were just so freaked out. Like, oh my God, we have escaped. We thought we've removed ourselves. And here it is. We're being, integrated, at least for the week or so. It was interesting. It was just...
Which is weird, Alan, because I mean, in the thumb, there's been quite a presence for a while of people, the Hmong and Vietnamese. So, and by the way, audience, when Alan said the Decker bar, that's not the name of the bar. It's the fact that's the only bar in Decker. So it's.
I think it was called the Decker bar.
Well, it's the obvious name.
I used to tip heavily. It'd be like $2.50 for a beer. I'd give like $6 because some of the guys would start messing with me, and the bartender, this woman, she'd go, "Leave him alone."
Either that or it's just beer goggles in a different way, Alan.
The cheapest security you can buy, right?
Yes.
So by the way,
well, how I'm curious as to how deep a civil suit can reach in holding, folks accountable and responsible. I mean, did the gun shop owner know that he was selling a gun to parents who were saying this is for, my son? And if he or she did know and sold it to him anyway, would he be held accountable? That kind of thing.
What is the age?
And I think
What's the age limit for gun
point.
purchases?
We should be looking at other sort of responsible parties here. The school may not be the best, target for accountability. I mean, what about Facebook? We're talking a lot about how big tech really facilitates a lot of criminal activity. And when, certainly everybody has a right to free speech and should be able to do that. But was there a role that Facebook played in this,
Well, that brings up this interesting kind of de facto dram shop act that does the gun owner now have the responsibility to do a background check of social media? That's really an intriguing idea.
I think we're really wading into the weeds on this one at this point. I mean, Facebook is a complaint-based system. And if nobody complained about it, which goes back what I said before, this was considered normal, then it's, they're never going to be held responsible for that stuff. We're just a platform. People can say what they want.
Right.
Oh man, I thought we had somebody else dial in.
If you're gathering that I've had problems with Facebook in the past, you are correct.
Well, 10 years ago, if somebody was looking on their phone for ammo during the thick of hunting season in Oxford, it probably wouldn't have even gotten raised to the attention of the teacher. So I think that's an important development. So, by the way, as a point of clarification, if you are wondering what the fluffy pouch in the front of a kilt is called, it is actually called a sporran.
Thank you.
I didn't want the FCC to get after us when you're talking about fluffy pouches on kilts.
Actually, and now that I think about it, I believe that knife or whatever it is, and it's not called a knife, it's called something else, is carried in a garter on the leg, if I'm not mistaken. See?
Yes.
I think you're right, Nancy.
Yeah. Okay, Tiffany Mac Ellis has told us this. So.
I think that's because a sporran is reserved for the haggis that you have to carry at all times when going into battle. All right. Well, when we're talking about people of honor and whether people get things right, of course, much is being made of the passing of one of the senior statesmen in the Republican Party, and that would be Bob Dole. Somebody who represents not only a particular bandwidth of the Republican Party, but probably the very last person who referred to himself in the third person.
That's very modern.
I think Dan Aykroyd did a great Bob Dole.
I don't think that's the last.
Bob Dole
used to do that all the time.
So did the late Norm Macdonald. He did a great one.
You know what I find interesting is I created a discussion on Facebook because I put something up saying Bob Dole, as he leaves, does not probably recognize the Republican Party that he leaves behind, and which I feel is true at some levels. But then some people said, well, guess what? He supported Trump both times, but I still think he would not have survived in this environment because I think at some point Bob Dole would have stood up for what's right. And maybe I'm giving him too much credit, but I feel like
you are.
I feel like the party that he was with has changed so much. Particularly Trump has just accelerated the craziness and really the lack of integrity of the Republican Party.
Well, I ran my first political campaign fresh out of journalism school in 2002. And I had worked in the Missouri State House before that, before term limits kicked in for the first time. And so I got to witness really the end of an era in politics and in statesmanship. And to me, all politics and beliefs aside, Bob Dole sort of his passing represents the end of an era of sort of diplomacy in our system and the way that, politicians really get things done. And we've moved into a place where power isn't necessarily found in Congress, or people think that it's found elsewhere in places like Facebook and social media. And, the rules that I think many of us who study politics and history, believe to be true to hold up our democracy don't necessarily apply in a lot of people's minds. And Bob Dole passing, I think, is a loss for that, because he could have been an example for younger Republicans.
So Tiffany,
he could have been.
You had people like John Danforth, John Ashcroft, even Mel Carnahan out of Missouri. So it seemed as though that was more the norm than the exception, right?
Well, I think certainly. I mean, a lot of it has changed because of technology and the way information has changed in the last 20 years. I don't think that any of us in 2000 could imagine that we'd be carrying computers around in our pockets where you could access any piece of information, at the drop of a dime. Like anything that you want to know about a kilt or anything else is right there. And so the way that we communicate and we talk to each other has just transformed so quickly over the last 20 years that our ways of dealing with that through the political system haven't really caught up yet. And I think that that's what we're dealing with. We're struggling with that right now, really, in our society.
And are we making any progress on catching up? No, because Congress has become this fucking clown, excuse my language, this clown show of people who are just capering for a spot on the Tucker Carlson show that night or CNN or wherever. I mean, I'm not going to both sides this one. The one thing I will say about Bob Dole, since you guys are kind of covering the serious stuff, is I had to respect him doing essentially, didn't he do like a boner pill commercial?
He was in Viagra. He was the front man, the pitch man for Viagra.
He was a pitchman for Viagra. And then he also did that spot with Britney Spears. I think it was for Pepsi. It was like a Super Bowl spot where he's like sitting, Britney Spears is, gyrating in her bare midriff and everything. And he's at home with his Pepsi, just kind of going, yeah. Like, so I'll give him credit for some humor.
Hit Bob Dole one more time.
Yeah.
In my journalism career, I had the good fortune to work at a Congressional Quarterly magazine where I covered defense and foreign policy and elections in 6 states and the intelligence committees. And I do recall meeting Bob Dole at that time. And one of the things that I was struck by was that when I first met him, I was like, wow, his hand, he was injured in World War II and his hand was withered, but you would never see that on TV, for whatever reason. The cameras were always, I don't know, I just never saw it. And even after I had noticed it, I never saw it. But I remember thinking at the time, and since then, that even with his injury, and it was a grievous injury that he had, it was very apparent, he was still able to rise to the seat of the Senate and become a leader in the Senate and have a voice in America. And I just thought that was pretty amazing. I mean, lots of people leave wars and, with injuries or not injured at all, and they're unable to, to function. And yet, he was able to not just function, but to thrive. And, I thought that was interesting about him.
Washington in that time was full of World War II vets. I mean,
yeah.
I know he had a bad injury, but so did John McCain. I mean, there were, and who's the guy from Hawaii with the
Daniel Inouye?
Who lost an arm. I mean, those people were all over the place. I mean,
wow, but you couldn't see John McCain's injury. He
couldn't hold he couldn't raise his arms above the level of his
Sarah
shoulders.
Palin.
What is that? Oh man! But in either case, I can't help but think of Bob Dole and not think about Newt Gingrich and that whole contract on America thing that they had done, during the Clinton years. That I think in a lot of ways, was sort of like a prelude to the foolishness that we see now. We talk about power, and but power is the ability to get things done, right? That's what it's all about. And I think that if you're going to Congress with this idea of being able to weld vast amounts of power, well, you're going to be, pretty disappointed from that perspective. Yeah. Except when you get to the top. If you're at the top, if you're the Speaker of the House, or Armed Services Committee or something like that, then you do have the opportunity to weld power in a way that is tangible. But if you're head of the Transportation Committee, and I think that's part of the problem with the Build Back Better thing that we have here now, it was supposed to be this panacea that, washed across the country that would allow for people to get, as Alan likes to say, manna from heaven, and fix everything, roads and systems and childcare and all that stuff. But we can't get it together as Democrats to make it relevant. And so it's just like, poof,
That's why.
Did you notice that Trump was not at Bob Dole's funeral? Did you guys notice that Trump was not at Bob Dole's funeral?
He's
Oh,
never
God,
at any. He's hated
that
by.
piece of crap. He won't go to Melania's funeral. It'll be, of course, I hope he dies before her. But I mean, I don't think he would go to one of his kids' funerals at this point. That guy's such a narcissist.
Well, once upon a time, I mean, people like, as you said, Daniel Inouye and people who served were given, if not respect and veneration, at least the benefit of the doubt. But look at people like Tammy Duckworth and Max Cleland, whose injuries were actually used against them in political campaigns. And so this idea about then where are the people of honor? By the way, one thing
John
I would
Kerry
like to...
too.
John Kerry.
Remember the Purple Heart Band-Aids everybody's wearing at the 2004 Republican convention? Oh, because he got a Purple Heart. Oh, that was what the Republican Party had become by the early 2000s. Sorry.
It's not like a bunch of middle schoolers, with that kind of stuff.
Exactly.
Well, intellectually, there's that question. By the way, I would like to, on behalf of the show, apologize to all clowns for Nancy's outburst. I know she didn't mean it.
I totally meant it. Clowns are creepy.
All right, that was my one annual disclaimer credit for you. But speaking of people for whom honor in serving has always seemed to be a bit too much of a burden, Congressman Devin Nunes from California has announced that he's leaving the House of Representatives in order to then move on to become director of Trumpavision, or whatever is the name that's going to be given to the new Trump social media platform. Was this inevitable? I mean, after all, it looks like he was in line to become, if the Republicans were to retake Congress, chairman of the all-powerful House Ways and Means Committee. Previously held by someone else of such impeccable character as Dan Rostenkowski of Illinois.
And Dan Ryan, too.
I found
all Ryan.
When I heard that news, I found that very heartening, because I feel like that guy is a moron. And so who better to have a moron running a moron's media company? So I feel like it's less of a threat when you have a guy like that. If they had somebody a little more sophisticated, but he's not very sophisticated. And so I was, like I said, I was heartened to see that.
I mean, what does he, why would you go work for a lunatic? That's the,
if you're a moron, that's why.
Because you're a moron. Oh, okay. Yeah.
It's pretty easy.
I think it goes to Greg's point earlier, though, about power and where does the power lay. And so this Nunes' congressional seat, I think, has been in his family for generations, and he recently redistricted, and he was probably going to lose. Everybody thought he was going to go to a different district. But, the fact that he decides to leave Congress when he was on a path to really, being in a position to influence the way our world works in favor of something that doesn't even exist, that, is going to spread misinformation, is really telling about how people think power is to be gained in our society right now. And, that's a disturbing thing to me, moron or not. There's money behind it, and they're going to use it, and they're going to do it. And, good, get out of Congress, and let's get somebody in there that can actually take the work more seriously then.
There should be a game. There should be a game.
It's either that or the latest grand grifting plan,
Well, I was just going to say, this whole thing is going to end up being a huge grift, because everything that Trump touches is in some way a con scheme. One thing I didn't read, though, in the coverage of this is, who does that put, assuming that the Republicans take Congress in the fall of 2022, who does that leave next in line for House Republican, the ranking member of
Kevin McCarthy,
Republican Ways and Means Committee? Did anybody read that anywhere? I have no idea.
Oh, I didn't look that up.
It's got to be Louis Gohmert.
Oh God!
Speaking of morons, he's the guy who thought we could change the orbit of the moon.
We could have a show, moron or not a moron.
That's what? That's what we should do. We should change it to, instead of Schmuck of the Week, it should be Moron of the Week.
Would it really change anything, Greg? Would it? Would it?
Right.
Yes, moron is more. It's catchier. It's schmuck is still kind of niche. Moron is more biting.
I don't think you get enough Yiddish in your life, Greg. I think you need to keep it at schmuck. So. Well, speaking of, at least Nunes has a job lined up. I don't know if we can say the same about Chris Cuomo, who was ignominiously let go from CNN for allegedly conducting himself in very bad ways of sexual harassment. He was only suspended for the allegations of misusing his platform to help out his brother, the former governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo. But it looks like Mario's boys are definitely on the ropes right now.
Well, I think the arrogance, they're mutual, both of them being pretty arrogant. I think it's caught up with them. It's, look, CNN needs to kind of clean it up a little bit. I think Anderson Cooper's probably their strongest. They have a couple other anchors, but there's Cuomo and really Don Lemon. I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of his. I think they need to revamp it a little bit. And, look, the whole cable landscape is crazy. And I think Fox really started it when CNN was out there initially. CNN was just very straightforward, kind of Associated Press kind of approach. And then Fox came in and started doing the slanted vision. And they were killing CNN and they were mocking him, saying, see, we're number one. And CNN said, wow, we've got to change our ways. And then MSNBC started changing their whole platform. And now what we have is just totally like polarizing cable.
That isn't really what we're talking about, though, Alan. And we're talking about the journalistic ethics of Chris Cuomo using his access and know-how and so forth to tear down a victim of his brother's sexual harassment. I mean,
I agree. I agree, but I think the thing is, it's provided a platform for this kind of the lines just keep getting grayer and grayer. Where in the past, I think journalists would have been like, no, I got to stay away from this. This is going to be, and I think just now it's like we can't tell. Like whose
team is he on? We can
it doesn't. It almost doesn't matter. So that was.
Yeah. I think, Alan, to your point, I was honestly surprised that CNN made that decision. I was glad that they did because he crossed journalistic ethic boundaries, and he should have been fired. But the fact that CNN did that was in the cable environment, in the background of Fox News. The fact that they did make that decision, regardless of his position or influence or whatever. Really restored a little bit of my faith in journalistic integrity. And I was glad to see that. So,
you wonder if it was just the ethics of journalism or suddenly the allegation of sexual harassment or whatever it was that surfaced and CNN probably just said, nope, that's it. We can't deal with this. Let's just wash your hands.
I agree with Said. I think it was the latest, stuff that was starting to bubble to the surface about Chris's own sort of alleged behavior in the past that was the straw that broke the camel's back. But Tracy, I really dig what you're saying here in relationship to crossing the ethical lines. One of the things that I'm curious about, though, is that is Chris and is Don Lemon and the rest of them, I think with the exception of my man Anderson Cooper and Wolf Blitzer, are they really considered journalists or are they considered sort of like,
entertainers?
Right. They're kind of they're in, like you said, they're kind of in a gray area there.
Yeah, I mean, let's get at it is not like, what we would hear from a serious journalist on ABC News, World News Tonight. It's World News Tonight. Let's get at it.
Can I
That's the question. Like, what is news, and who's supposed to give it and how are we supposed to, be able to trust it and the information that we get and where we get it from? And, I went to the oldest journalism school in the world and, learned a lot about that. And I've thought about that, for most of my career as a lawyer and even after I left journalism, go into politics. the funny thing, I got a polling call last night that I think it was on behalf of Amazon. They wouldn't tell me, of course, who it was on behalf of, but they went through after I got through all the earlier hoops of questions and asked me where I got my news from. And the sources that they listed were really interesting to me. So they started off with, do you get it from Fox, all the networks, NBC, MSNBC, they go through the cable ones, and then they would throw in Facebook. And then a few more, they would be like LinkedIn, and they'd be like Twitter. And every time that the pollster would ask me this, I said, that's not news. That's social media. That's not news. That's social media. So no, but it's indicative of the fact that I don't know that we as Americans or even people right now really know what the news is and like how to believe it. And it's incumbent upon us to really figure that out for ourselves. And it's not something that like kids are taught in school. Like, how do you trust the information and where you're getting it from? And I think all of us here, having operated in a journalism world, understand that. We probably read more news sources in a single day than many people read in their entire lives, just to ensure that we're getting all the most accurate information that we can. But
when I was in high school, in 10th grade, I took a class called mass communications. And we covered all this. We basically learned how to read a newspaper, how to tell which one is the opinion, and that's okay, which one is the news story, how are news stories organized, this sort of thing. And honest to God, that laid a foundation of media literacy that I rely on to this day. And you're right. I mean, people who will read something on Facebook and think it has the same power and weight as something that they read in the Wall Street Journal it just blows my mind. But it shouldn't, because people are stupid. So,
well, I mean, it goes back to the earlier point about Nunes going to start a social media platform or whatever it's going to be, because
propaganda network, essentially.
Yeah,
because their cries of fake news has undermined things to the point where anything that gets posted anywhere somehow is like news. Now, I'm all for the citizen journalism. We have Lou Malechko here who covers city council, and he posts things on Facebook about, what goes on because, nobody's covering it.
Yeah.
At the same time, somebody posting an opinion on their personal Facebook page, with a link to some phony website. And this is the other thing we haven't talked about, Tiffany, Al, and Said, and everybody, and that is the proliferation of fake news sites and as a point of disinformation to advance a particular cause. People create that without penalty, these days.
I look at Facebook pages for local Republican organizations. I am shocked at the stuff that these leading, leaders in at least the local level of the Republican Party will post on their Facebook pages. It's bullshit from, Daily Wire and Breitbart and Rumble and all these things. Talk about living in a bubble. I mean, I sometimes feel like I live in a bubble because I read the Detroit dailies, Cranes, the New York Times, Washington Post, that kind of thing. I feel like but at least I feel like I'm in a much smarter bubble than some of these other people.
But this misinformation and the proliferation of misinformation, like a tale as old as journalism itself. I mean, when you talk about the newspaper wars, and Pulitzers and the Hearsts and all of it, and yellow journalism, I mean, it's something that's been going on for centuries, but it's incumbent upon, people to really put their foot down. And, I think that's the concept of professionalism in journalism and ethics in journalism. And we talked a lot about, when I was in school, should journalists be a licensed profession? Who is considered a journalist, And I think it's a relevant question that needs to be talked about still every day.
I was going to say, Donald Trump, the whole fake news thing, I mean, he has contributed to fascism. When Danny Fenster, the journalist who was in Myanmar, when he was about to be released, he's sitting, I guess, in a police station, and they're saying, okay, you've been sentenced to 11 years, we're going to pardon you now. However, you have to agree to this. And one of the things they said, you have to agree not to print fake news. And there's actually a statue in Myanmar that uses the phrase fake news. So we can see how it's resonated, the impression, that the fascism that Trump has contributed around the world.
Well, this is sort of the reflex response by the Modi government in India as well. Everything that is seen as a critique is fake news. Nancy.
I was just going to say, that's an interesting detail from that Danny Fenster interview that you did, but I thought the absolute cake taker was the fact that the other inmates in insane prison in Myanmar wanted to know about George Soros. Like, what about this George Soros guy?
Right. He said, hey, he goes, all the Jews don't know each other. He goes, I don't really know him.
You know, you were talking about Chris Cuomo and his firing, and then I was curious the other day with the Jesse Smollett conviction, and when Jesse Smollett got on the stand there in Chicago to proclaim his innocence about faking, you know, the MAGA attack and the gay slur attack and all that stuff, he invoked Don Lemon on the witness stand, saying that, hey, you know, Don had reached out to me to let me know that the cops didn't believe me or something like that. And so, of course, you know, the right lit up, you know,
well,
with
you're
that.
Just looking for an interview, though, that's possible, too. You know, hey, I heard the cops don't believe you. Talk to me. So.
Oh, right. But that's true. That could be.
I think that's fair. But
well, that circles all the way back to the point that Tiffany was making, and you were making with her regarding solicitation of clients for the Crumbleys.
I think if you could see the suck up emails that journalists were after a exclusive interview with people that are in the news, if you could take a look at those, you would be shocked. But anyway.
Well, I don't know, Nancy. I think you're being a little elitist. I mean, TMZ, NPR, they both have 3 letters. You know, so bougie of you.
Well, what did you guys think about that conviction, by the way? Do you think Smollett's going to get some jail time, or should he get jail time?
He'll probably get some public service. I doubt that.
I think he's going to get jail time, and I think he's going to be serving consecutive, not concurrent terms. So that's my prediction.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, with that, I think it's a perfect segue to either schmuck or moron of the week. Take it away, Michael.
And now it's time for Deadline Detroit's nominees for Schmuck of the Week.
All right, Tiffany, you are our new attendee and participant and panelist. Who is your schmuck of the week?
Oh, that's a real tough.
It always is. There's always so many candidates in a week, but go ahead.
Yeah. You know, I will, I don't even know this person's name, but I'll just throw it out there. And this will just be a nod to the Michigan State fans who feel slighted in the Heisman process here. But whoever decided that Kenneth Walker shouldn't go to New York along with, you know, his friends from Michigan, I think is probably the schmuck there.
Okay. You didn't make the final cut for this weekend's announcement of the Heisman Trophy winner. Okay, despite having posted some pretty impressive statistics.
Yeah.
Okay. Nancy.
Okay. Mine is Elon Musk. And this goes back to a story that broke earlier this week, which used as its main source a good friend of mine, Vince Patton, who is a retired journalist who lives in Oregon and owns a Tesla. And as you may or may not know, Tesla will ship software updates to its cars. I imagine probably all cars do this now, but I only drive old ones, so I haven't upgraded to that level yet. But, you know, to run the various computerized systems. Well, he realized that there are video games in this latest update that will run on the main screen next to the driver while the car is in motion. Now, Elon Musk has gotten away with, I don't want to say gotten away with murder in the figurative sense, because it's nearly literal, in calling the driver assist technology autopilot, because it encourages drivers to just punch it and then just stop paying attention. But adding a distraction in the form of a video game that can be played while your car is driving itself, I think, is next level schmuckitude. So Elon Musk. Plus, I don't like his new haircut, which is so fascist. It's almost. He looks like the villain in a Bond movie. I mean, he's like got this. It's completely shaved on the side, and he has this weird puff on the top. He's gone off his rocker. Elon Musk.
That's old school 80s punk.
It's not. It has no 80s to it at all.
Don't impugn 80s punk. Thank you very much. By the way, Nancy, let me one of these days, let me tell you about my 76 Buick Century that I rigged with an Atari 2600 to play while I was driving.
Okay.
Kidding. Greg.
My schmuck of the week is John Witz, the guy who puts on the winter bust in Detroit, also known as the winter blast, which has been a bust, for the last few years, either because of the weather or because it just kind of sucks, trying to move that thing to Royal Oak, where he puts on the successful Arts, Beats, and Eats, which I always think is like a really cool event. But I recall when Arts, Beats, and Eats was in Pontiac and it got moved, and he's really good at being able to play one city against the other when he doesn't seem to be able to get what he needs from the local officials. And in this case, I saw on Deadline Detroit the story that was done by Cranes that talked about how Royal Oak is probably going to step up and fund the winter bust and move it out of downtown Detroit. And meanwhile, the DDA was kind of trying to scramble to see whether or not it would be something that they wanted to do. And so, I get it, John, but, we've seen this story before. And, sometimes some things just don't work out. And I think winter bust is one of them. You shouldn't try and play one city against the other to keep a bad thing going.
Wasn't that event born during the Super Bowl in 2005? Wasn't that?
I believe it was.
Of the boy, I feel like an old timer.
Pittsburgh, I think, when they're playing Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
But it started in Detroit as part of the festivities surrounding the Super Bowl in February.
Right. When the Lions won the Super Bowl in 2005 or 6, right?
Look, they won a game. So
when the Lions got to go to the Super Bowl in their own city, that's what you mean, like as attendees.
Right.
But it is I mean, you're right. And this whole theme of, well, let's take advantage of the natural things that we have, as if, we're all at Boyne Mountain where you can do stuff. They do stuff outside. But this is Detroit and it's on the river and it's freezing. Nobody wants to be down there.
Well, if he's putting all of his eggs in one basket in Royal Oak,
I think the way
he's putting all of his eggs in one basket in Royal Oak, and he's had all these problems with both of them. I mean, it's just bound that he's going to, at some point, piss them off too. What's he going to do then?
Well, what I think he's going to do is, I think he's going to have the Grand Prix moved to Woodward, going all the way to the Pontiac Loop, all the way downtown to Detroit through Royal Oak.
Wow.
That would be a gangster move. So
That'd be cool.
I'd actually, it would be like the Dream Cruise on cocaine. So. Alan, your schmuck of the week.
My schmuck of the week. I was going to say real quickly, Mark Meadows for now refusing to cooperate with the January 6th committee. But also my other one is a local, Tim Boffner from Romeo, who was just charged in the January 6th event. And as Nancy always points out, these people cannot help but post their crimes on Facebook. So he writes on Facebook, or he says, started spraying, and then wrote, "Fuck those cops" up. And then he said, and then he puts, "I still don't know how I ended up basically in a pepper spray fight with cops at the Capitol Police." So if you're a prosecutor, thank you very much.
Right.
And I'm not the only one to point that out. Steve Fishman made that point very eloquently a few weeks ago when he said he had to tell his clients, just don't put your crimes on Instagram, okay? It makes things much easier.
circumstantial evidence is just too postmodern. You need something a little bit more direct. So,
Yeah, it's like the dope dealer posing with all his dope and his guns and money, you know.
Right. The Chambers brothers back in what was it, 1988, 89, when they're being tried in federal court. Part of the evidence was a video of them throwing up money, talking about how rich they are, and best friends. Which was a murder for hire group, and also in the 90s in Detroit, they were posing with AK-47s and stuff like that. So,
man,
it's not a good look when you have a record too, when you're posing with an AK-47.
Every time, Alan, you mention the Chambers brothers, I want to go.
Time has come today.
Right. Exactly.
Well, speaking of putting it out there, my schmuck of the week is Kentucky Republican Congressman Thomas Massey, who decided in his tone-deaf ways to posting a Christmas card with his entire family saying, Merry Christmas, P.S. Santa, please bring ammo. I think that pretty much speaks for itself. Yeah. So,
and then
that would be creepy any year.
And then Lauren Boebert did the same thing with her 4 misbegotten children. So
that's right. Yes, because Bob can't help it. So, anyways, well, listen. Thank you everyone for being on and for tuning in to another episode of The Week That Was. And thank you, Tiffany Ellis, for joining us. Hope to see you again. Greg Bowen, thank you as always. Loving the Rock in the Black. Nancy, of course, thank you. And Alan.
Drive home safely.